Thank you for joining us for this session, which falls, broadly speaking, under the rubric of smart cities, although one of our speakers, Carlo Ratti, prefers the label sensible city, while the other, Gabriella Gomez-Mont, avoids the term altogether and speaks of civic innovation and urban creativity. Both, however, converge in their face in cities, in their capacity to enrich lives, enhance sustainability, and foster civic engagement. They share an infectious optimism when it comes to the transformative power of information technology in making cities and the mechanisms of their governance more intelligible, more transparent, more accessible, and therefore more amenable to ameliorative action in a participatory democracy. We will be starting with Carlo Ratti, who is an architect and engineer by training. He practices in Italy and teaches at MIT, where he directs the Senseable City Lab, one of the most thriving units in the Media Lab. Carlo presents around the world on the topic of smart cities, including TED 2011, and his work has been showcased in leading publications and exhibitions globally. In 2011, Fast Company named him as one of the 50 most influential designers in America. And Wired magazine featured him in their Smart City list 2012, 50 people who will change the world. Gabriella Gomez-Mont directs Laboratorio para la Ciudad, Mexico City's new creative think tank and experimental space, a place to reflect on the city with wildly speculative propositions as well as rigorously practical projects. She has won several international awards and recognitions for her work in different disciplines, including the prestigious City 2.0 TED Prize. And Gabriella is actually a TED Senior Fellow, a Yale World Fellow, and was recently selected as World Cities Summit Young Leader. Both see a bright future for our cities and are keen on getting us there one project at a time. We turn to Carlo now.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, don't believe all the stuff in the bio. But what I want to do is share with you, we only have 6 minutes each, and then we'll have a discussion, a conversation, both here and with you. And what I want to do then in the next 6 minutes is share with you a few things about this space. Yes, some people call it smart cities. We like to call it more like sensible cities. That's the name of our lab. We think that the emphasis should be a bit less on technology, a bit more on the human side of cities. And, and what all of this is about. And I want to start with this picture. This is something actually Richard Florida just mentioned above in the speech he gave a moment ago, which is the beginning of the internet revolution. This is in the 1990s. People thought that distance would be less and less important. One of the books at the time was called The Death of Distance, and people thought because of connectivity, because of networks, then our life would be increasingly virtual, as we see here. So much so that some people even thought that cities would disappear. This is Gilder, 1996, 1995. We are headed for the death of cities. Cities are leftover baggage from the industrial era. So what does this tell you? The first thing it tells you is never do predictions. Because, no prediction could have been more wrong. And if you do a prediction today, it's quite likely 20 years from now, somebody like me will look at what you said and point it out. So we know the cities have been thriving over the past couple of decades. This is a picture from China. China this century might build more urban fabric than humanity ever built before. We know that since 2008, half of the world's population lives in cities. And this number actually might swell to 5 billion by 2030. So what has happened is actually the digital that Gilder and other people thought would kill physical space didn't have that effect. But something else is happening. And what is happening is that digital and physical are converging. The world of networks, of sensors, of all these kind of distributed electronics, ubiquitous computing, as some people call it, is converging with the space of cities. And that is opening up incredible new opportunities at the convergence of bits and atoms about how we collect information from cities in real time, how we develop apps in order to respond to that, and ultimately how we can plan and design our cities. And yes, this is what many people refer to as smart cities. What is happening with the underlying thing is quite real, is this kind of convergence of digital and physical in the spaces we live. It's more difficult to talk about it. Sometimes it gets a bit fluffy because there's so many different aspects you can cover. This is about anything from an app such as Uber or Airbnb to creating infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, to civic participation. So all of this are different things enabled by this convergence. What this convergence in particular allows you is collect a lot of data from cities, sensing, and then using the data to transform the city, actuating. That is really the principle of planning. If you go back to the origins of planning, to one of the first modern planners, El-Khoury, writing over 100 years ago, he was saying, in order to plan, you need to have a lot of surveys. You need to survey first and then plan. And today, we can actually survey to an unprecedented extent, thanks to all of the data we have from our cities. Well, for instance, we can survey a city like this using data from taxi. This is billions and billions of data points from the taxi network in Lisbon. And we couldn't describe the city of Lisbon like this just 10 or 20 years ago, with all of these kind of dynamic flows. I'll give you just as a quick example, another project we've been doing recently is a project where we looked at this computer. Today, you know everything about this computer. You know every chip on the planet, where it was produced, how it moved, and how it became that machine. However, if years from now you stop using that machine, you give it to somebody else, and at one point somebody will throw it away, and then you know very little about that machine. Sometimes this is what happens to it. A lot of electronics from the United States is shipped illegally to Asia, from Europe to Africa. So our idea was, what if we could develop a little tag to put on trash, and then use it to start following trash? We designed it with, we had to produce it together with Qualcomm. It's like almost like a miniature cell phone reporting its location and transmitting it to the network. And so here we put the first deployment. We put many, many tags, 3,000 tags on pieces of trash in the city of Seattle. And after putting a tag on all of them, we started following them. It's a day of deployment in Seattle. After a few days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But naturally, big surprise, how far things started to travel. Sometimes in crazy, unpredictable way. Look at the trace that went to Chicago, and then down back to Baja California. And it's still moving after 1 month and 2 months. We couldn't think of better music than the Faraway Symphony. So anyway, so this is just to give you a sense of what we can do today with technology, to use technology to sense the city. However, I want to tell you something else. So there's two things here. One thing is that this convergence of digital and physical is changing the way we understand the city, and hence has an impact on our life in the city. But the other thing that's very exciting as well is how technology, ubiquitous computing, is having an impact on ourselves, on the way we live, and how that in turn actually means a city that needs to adjust. Is a bit some of the other things we were talking about before today. And this I want to share with you just a project very quickly. It's a project we've been doing in Guadalajara. We work with the Mexican government in order to develop a project that they called Ciudad Creativa Digital, Digital Creative City. And here the idea is, well, in many places in Latin America, you got beautiful outdoor spaces. You've got a beautiful climate. You can actually spend a lot of the time outdoors instead of being like in fish tanks, in buildings, which air-conditioned buildings, glazed buildings. So the idea in this place in Guadalajara was really how can we use outdoor spaces, courtyards, the beautiful courtyards of Mexican tradition that you find all across the region, how can we use them as an extension to the office spaces where we work? And again, this is enabled by technology. Technology gives us more freedom, more mobile, makes us more mobile. We can work in different places. And still we want to work together, but with better environmental conditions. So this is actually some of the work we've been doing there. Here you see the Parque Morelos, but then all the courtyards inside the new development, how they become outdoor extension of all the offices. How the fact that we are more mobile allows us, yes, to use in different ways all of the spaces outdoors next to us. And I'll show you now a little video. I use the Spanish version of the project. And I think I wanted to leave you with this as something that, yes, all of the talk about smart cities is important. It's about how the city itself can become more intelligent, but it's also how technology is changing our lives, and that has an impact or requires kind of a new design in our cities.
Guadalajara, capital cultural en el corazón de Jalisco, Latinoamérica y el mundo, que ha evolucionado a través de la historia para convertirse en el Silicon Valley mexicano. Lo que alguna vez fuera el corazón vibrante de la ciudad, el Parque Morelos, está a punto de convertirse en un ambicioso programa de regeneración que transformará a la ciudad en uno de los centros líderes del mundo en creación digital. La ciudad creativa digital se basa en las fuerzas del sitio, su talento, su entorno histórico y sus conexiones para lograr una nueva sustentabilidad social y ambiental. Sus patios de belleza incomparable como el Hospicio Cabañas, sitio reconocido por la UNESCO como Patrimonio de la Humanidad, se convierten en el tema de diseño de la ciudad, integrando áreas de comercio, vivienda, trabajo y recreo en un ambiente urbano de escala humana. Al tiempo en que estructuras de mayor altura permitirán la densidad de desarrollos sustentables propios del siglo XXI. El parque es el escenario principal de la ciudad creativa digital, un lugar de interacción social, trabajo creativo, cultura y talento. Los patios, nuevos espacios de trabajo, paz y descanso, inmersos en el placentero clima de Guadalajara, generan un estilo de vida laboral único en entornos abiertos. El entorno urbano inteligente, un laboratorio vivo para el desarrollo de plataformas digitales, promueve el crecimiento de las industrias de medios del futuro. Ciudad Creativa Digital. Una oportunidad única de inversión para forjar la economía creativa del mañana. Un desarrollo sin paralelo para servir a Guadalajara, México, Latinoamérica y el mundo.
So, and what I wanted to leave you with, yes, was just the fact that look at technology, but look at also technology, how it's changing our life and how this can bring us, for instance, closer to nature or, to working outdoors. So some of the things we really have been struggling, we've been liking for thousands of years, and they become possible again once we are more flexible in the way we organize our daily life. Thank you.
Muy buenas tardes a todos. Hello, everybody. So I am here to tell you about a very little lab for a very large city. Since about 2 years back, I've been working for the mayor of Mexico City. And we have nowadays a very small yet interesting, I believe, new type of government office. So we function as an experimental space, as the creative think tank for the whole of the government. Why do you ask, does the government, especially the size of Mexico City that has 300,000 people working in its entrails, need 20 more people working in it? Well, we're basically part of a new family of laboratories worldwide. We're not the first, but there's not that many. There's maybe about 12 of these types of public laboratories, if you will, working within government. And so in many ways, what we try to do is become these hybrid spaces where civil society and government can mix. And besides also, we try to deal with a small paradox, or a large paradox rather. Because on one hand, as citizens, we really want our governments to be solid and sure-footed and go forward in very secure ways. And on the other hand, many times we complain that governments are not necessarily the ones that are bringing in the best ideas and up with the time, especially nowadays, that in technology and also in concepts, things are changing so quickly. So that's actually where we come in. We function as a space that mitigates risk for the rest of the government. So something that maybe a Ministry of Health could not do, or the Ministry of Education, we can actually do on a smaller scale pilot, and then when it's proven successful, then we can blow it up to a larger scale. One of our questions at the lab is about how to create more public value. How can it not only be the government creating public value, but how can the government also catalyze individuals and universities and other people to also create like this common good, if you will. Possibly what makes us most different to the other labs out there is this, Mexico City. I don't know if you've been there, but Mexico City is 22 million people on a metropolitan region. 5 million people ride the subway every day, so that's 2 cities of Chicago getting up and down from a subway. So as you can imagine, when you talk about scale, this puts it in a completely different perspective. And the question is, why would the rest of the world care about cities like this? As Carlo mentioned, 50% of the population the world population is now living in cities. A number that doesn't get thrown out there all that often is that Latin America actually reached that 50% back in the 70s, and now we're up to 75%. So in many ways, since the emerging cities as well as the megacities are going to come from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa, it becomes every time more important for us to figure out what we're going to do with mobility and what we're going to do with youth in these types of terrains. So that's actually when it becomes relevant. This is my team. This is, as you can see, it's a young team, and it's full of unusual suspects for government. I have everything from intelligence expert to artificial intelligence expert, historians, artists, designers, writers. So it's actually quite a motley crew. And as I've said many times, we're actually the first experiment of the lab. 20 people that had no prior experience of government now reporting directly to the mayor of Mexico City. We have 2 main focuses. One of them is civic innovation. How can you start rethinking and reimagining the way that government comes together with civil society to propose different types of projects, as well as urban creativity. How do we make the city in and of itself that traveling surface for ideas? This is a lab. We had the great fortune of landing upon a government rooftop. This is our space. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, and really put our money where our mouth is have a little space of government become a space not only for complaints and services, but for ideas and citizens and debates and forums and talks. We've had the great privilege of having some amazing people up there, including the mayor of Mexico City, but also internationally people such as Perry Chen, who's a co-founder of Kickstarter, was our resident for a month. Kickstarter, as you probably know, is now pulling in $1,300,000 a day for creative projects. So it's actually super interesting to see how this city-making machine, which is government, can actually be infused with these super creative minds, not only locally, but internationally. This is what it looks like, more or less. Every time, things fill up more or less in about a day and a half now, so there's a lot of hunger from civil society to be part of the conversations. We also host larger events because we actually think that conversation is the first technology, if you will. Like that is the first meeting place between government and civil society. And for talking about walkability, we get 600 people signed up by day 2, filled to the brim, so it's actually very exciting. We work with what we call experiments. We've hosted in the last 2 years that we've existed more than 50 experiments that are completely different in scale, and we have the delicious capacity of being able to explore both the very outlandish as well as the very practical. So this, for example, is some of our urban interventions that are trying to reconfigure and basically reimagine what political language and urban space can actually mean in when you put them together. But we also do some very serious stuff that involves the whole of the government, such as the Open Government program. And this has been both having more or less about 700 people from government pass through our doors for capacity building, everything from open data to new concepts. And just last week, I'm very happy to say, working with a group that we actually started within government with many ministers, we just passed the world's first open city law. So this is going to be very exciting, not only in what it actually puts forth, but also in the way the law works, because basically this law answers the question, how do you create legal frameworks for changing scenarios? Because as we all know, open government is actually also a cultural thing. No? We've been working as well with the whole technological infrastructure of the city, giving new capacities to the IT systems. We also created an experimental data portal that then informed the official one. And just in the first 3 months when we put up some APIs or APIs, I always forget how you pronounce that in English, we had more than 4 million requests for the mobility, so API. So you can actually see that there's quite a bit of hunger in the Mexico City crowd. We won the Audi Urban Future Award. I'm proud to say it's the first time that the prize stays in Latin America, and also the first time that government is part of the award-winning team, here with Carlos Garchenson, as well as with Jose Castillo. And what we proposed was a way of having both government data as well as civil society data be joined so we can start thinking about mobility in real time in the city. And this is in the works. So it's a whole data doning project that we've been working on. But talking about mobility, for example, it's not only the technological infrastructure. How do you actually start thinking of the city itself as a system? So what we've been doing, this was 3 weeks ago, we've been putting together the ministers with a young crowd of very talented people. So we've now created some working tables with the minister as well as his main directors, as well as with the innovation in mobility startups in Mexico City. And we're starting a citywide conversation of how we can integrate some new things that are happening into the way that the city itself is planning mobility. We also put up participatory platforms, really interested in incubating citizens' ideas that I won't get into, and also answering questions with technology and also non-technological means. But just for example, Mexico City has 140,000 taxis out there, and 20,000 as well, but they're pirate. And you have probably heard that it's not that safe to hail a cab from the streets in Mexico City. It's usually the 20,000 pirate cabs out there. So one of our young programmers actually created an app where in real time, very quickly, streaming data from 4 ministries, which is the first time that you can actually see if you're getting into official cab, and you can also give these cabs a rating. We also rolled out Code for Mexico City in conjunction with Code for America, which basically means putting 6 very talented young programmers into city government and seeing what happens when you marry deep-seated knowledge of government with new ideas and new platforms for civil society. This is what our group looked like, as well as with the volunteers. It's also been very exciting to see how, even though there's a huge mistrust in government nowadays, that I'm sure is not exclusive to Mexico, every time you open a door, civil society just fills them up. We've hosted 2 data festivals. The first time we had 500 people signed up by day 4 and 200 people on the waiting list. And this last one we had 1,070 people signing up. So this is for programmers and specialized people. So it's actually very exciting to see. And then we're also rolling out several of the things that came out, because we know all the critiques that have been doled out at hackathons. This is the Minister of Public Security, together with some youngsters that feel that they have cracked the way that we can actually get corruption in transit police down to a bare minimum. So you will be seeing this rolled out in the next few months. We're also trying to instill new practices. If government is a public agency, how can we make the technology that we buy not only our own, but actually the citizens as well? So everything all the apps that have been bought in recent times, we're gonna be putting up on GitHub, and now we have civil society also helping to better the code. Those are the practical things, but we've also been working with artists in some interesting projects that will hopefully someday inform the way that cities are built. This is an amazing project by Gilberto Esparza. This is a hybrid being between plant and machine that can live for more than a month. It can depollute rivers it purifies water from polluted urban rivers, and it also runs away if you try to touch it. But this has actually been an amazing tool for civic engagement, because it's not the same thing to get kids involved in why they shouldn't throw garbage or soap into rivers when there is a boring guy that's trying to explain, when rather it's actually these types of things. We're also going to be working with the Robotics Institute in Mexico City in UNAM on, as you well know, we're unfortunately in earthquake territory, and so they've been working on some very interesting robots in case of emergency. So we're also going to be working with them to see what this new breed of creatures can look like. I also have the fortune of just being named a Director's Fellow at the MIT Media Lab, and we will be doing some amazing work with them, really thinking about public policy and new technology, and how instead of waiting 10 years for the newest ideas to come into government, we can actually have this very nice loop coming down. So Joito's coming down in September with about 10 of his professors and students, and we will start this 2-year collaboration. So basically, I believe that the big question here is that maybe our idea about what a city does has changed drastically during the years. During modernist times, we thought that cities were made to be only fast and efficient, and right now we see that that's actually not the case. Cities should be so much more. So the big question that we have at the lab is, if cities are changing, shouldn't government too? Can government also become a catalyzer, a creative agent? And I'm very happy that Mexico City has been one of the few cities to start thinking about a new generation of creative bureaucrats. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentations. I sincerely wish I could take credit for orchestrating the session and put you two on this stage together, because I think this is a great pairing. I see a complementarity on so many fronts. For instance, Carlos' project is so much about landing the bits on the atoms, so to speak, like finding touchdown spaces where the infosphere could have a kind of a transformative effect on the city. Whereas for Gabriella, actually the commitment first comes to the physical, to the public spaces, and then the attempt is to bring some kind of digital enhancement. So I think you're working from two different directions and converging on this alignment of the bits and the atoms, as you put it. Also, Carlo, your innovation is very much in the realm of technology, whereas your efforts are in the reconstitution of, I think, of a reinvention of agency. So I cannot help imagine what would your innovative agency do in deploying Carlo's innovative technology. So I'm wondering, when you saw each other's presentations, if you were thinking along those lines, and that you see the affinity, the alignment, and that you could potentially think of a collaboration. And how would you characterize this kind of convergence?
Yeah, I'll leave it to you first.
I think you're completely right. For us, technology, I think, is an amazing tool to amplify what we can find in society, as well as to amplify new powers for government. I mean, it's been said many times that maybe democracy's turn is now and not necessarily all those years back, because we finally have several tools at our disposal where we could really start thinking about bringing in voices of civil society into the way that government functions on an everyday basis. So I completely agree on that point. And then I know several people on Carlos' teams. In fact, one of our partners in the Audi Urban Future Award, Carlos Garchenson, is now at the Senseable City Lab, working with Carlos, or it will be soon, right, I believe?
Yeah, he's coming soon.
And Ricardo Alvarez, who's, besides being a friend, he's also been somebody that I've loved bouncing ideas back and forth with, who was doing the Ciudad Creativa Digital that Carlos mentioned. So there's already been quite a lot of conversation going from one lab to the other. So definitely.
And yeah, totally. And I want to say something. Yes, you can see things at different perspectives, but I think there's something in common. And the thing in common is actually the human side. It's about your citizens. I think ultimately in both cases about looking at how you live the city, how you experience the city, how we as citizens actually can do new things. Technology also for us is not the goal. Technology is, maybe when you see, we only had 6 minutes for the presentation, so I couldn't tell you more, for instance, about the trash truck project. But for us, it was not about developing a technology for tagging. It was, and for tracking. It was really much more about how to engage people, how that can promote behavioral change. There's a few papers we've done where we actually looked at how people change their behavior after knowing what happens to the trash you throw away, and how people actually then decided, well, I'm not going to drink water in plastic bottles anymore because of that. So I think, what is common is really, yes, technology is just a tool, but it's about how can we change the experience of the city, the engagement of citizens, thanks to new tools.
Right.
Yeah.
So then let me, I'm going to tease out perhaps also the differences. So maybe in order to point perhaps to a bifurcation in the discussion on smart cities. In my mind, Gabriella, because also I read somewhere in one of your interviews, you referring to Mexico City as your playground. So there's a kind of almost a ludic element to the project. You want to open things up and leave them unpredictable. Whereas I think, Carlo, in your case, you are committed to notions of efficiency, predictability, rationality. So I actually see this kind of division developing in the discussion on smart cities. Am I qualifying your positions correctly, or do you want to comment on this?
Again, I think maybe we're extrapolating from one data point that did a very small selection. I think in many of the other projects, we really try to play also with the unpredictable. I think that actually one of the things technology is doing is liberating us from some of the old constraints and giving us much more freedom to choose different routes, not necessarily the most efficient route. I think efficiency could be there, but I think what we want to maximize is engagement and experience. And efficiency, yes, you certainly want to have a city that doesn't waste resources, where traffic, is optimized. But I think the ultimate goal is really, again, going back to the human side, how you live in the city. So, and again, it would probably. It was difficult in just two projects to give a sense of that. I think this convergence has many ways to be seen, but I wrote an article in Scientific American really focusing on that the city is not just about, smart cities should not be just about efficiency, it's much more than that. It's, again, it's the human component.
But in terms of the human component, your goal is to enhance comfort or enhance sustainability, or how?
I would say is actually to give people the option. I'll tell you also something else that architects in the past century, and they thought they had the solution. So if you think about, there's a beautiful picture of architecture in the 20th century, is Le Corbusier. When he presented his vision for Paris in the 1920s, the so-called Plan Voisin, there's this very famous picture of Le Corbusier with his can presenting it. His idea was quite simple, was basically demolish all of Paris, just leave Notre Dame and a couple of other things as memories from the past, and then replace everything with new modernist towers, concrete towers. And when he does that, he had the idea, like many architects in the past century, that actually architects could make decisions for the city and for people. I think that is not the case anymore. I think, luckily, the idea of what an architect should do is very different today, and at least what we want to do is what Bucky Fuller used to say, especially as developed incidentally in a class at MIT in 1956, is the idea of how you can, by introducing new artifacts in the city or in the environment, you can promote new type of interactions. So in a certain sense, what we are trying to do is introducing new potential for citizens to interact with the city. And we don't think that actually we should just then make a decision and say, well, this is the way to go. We need to optimize the city for trash, for traffic, whatever for energy. Then that's a decision that people should make. So I think the important thing, the way we see our role at the lab, is that we should propose and develop and test and what we call usually demos, urban demos, that then would allow a debate to be generated and people to make decisions. And the final thing I want to say is that when you do that, you want to look at the positive things, but also the negative things. It's almost like some of you might be familiar with white hacking. It's the idea that you can be a hacker for good, in the sense you highlight a vulnerability of a system for people to fix it. And in the same way as I think as researchers, as designers, as architects, I think we want to do the same. We want to look at the positive and the negative. We want to look at the utopian and the dystopian, so that then society can grow antibodies and make decisions. So I think that's is what I would say. So it's not up to us to make those decisions. I think those are decisions about the city we should make together.
Right. I mean, Gabriella, for you, the proliferation of data is the means for intensifying a kind of collective imaginary, you speak of fiction, you speak of a play. Would you like to elaborate a bit on this kind of ludic and creative impulse that you are, that's fueling your project, I believe?
Absolutely. So, yes, we're incredibly interested in being able to travel the scale from what we consider some institutional changes that we think are necessary. Even being able to rearticulate the way that government and civil society come together becomes a very interesting thing beyond technology. You know, how do you actually start these conversations? How does this ivory tower of government actually start opening up its doors every time more so to very talented citizens? And I mean, not only putting out calls for what is called open innovation, where like thousands of citizens can send in their ideas, but how do you actually also start bringing in some very forward-thinking people into the entrails of government? As I mentioned, one of the epiphanies since I've been working here in government is that it's an amazing city-making machine. Like, there is not 1 minute of your daily interaction with the city that is not in some way influenced by decisions that are taken in government. At the same time, a place like Mexico City actually makes a case for the complete opposite. 60% of the city started informally, so there was no towering hand that said this is the way the city will be constructed. And there's also a very interesting change, I believe, nowadays of thinking how citizens can become part of this creation of a city on a day-to-day basis. Like, how does society actually also jump into the conversation and is able to mold the way that the city interacts with us? So I have the feeling that it's in this in-between space, both a very practical, as we've been basically rehauling the whole infrastructure for open data, for example, in terms of government as well as policy. But at the same time, how do you actually also start that creative edge, as you well mentioned, both without and within government, so some interesting things can happen, and we can start imagining cities on other levels as well.